Greetings and welcome to the pod. My name is Mark West, and if you live on the east coast of Australia, your ocean swimming season has been rudely interrupted this summer by the weather, with swims cancelled up and down the coast because of high swells and flooding. Australia has just experienced its wettest summer for 5 years because of a climate cycle known as La Nina. Associate Professor Andrea Taschetto is an oceanographer and ARC Future Fellow at the Climate Change Research Centre, UNSW. I had a great chat with Andrea about the role of the ocean in our climate, and I started by asking her about the wonderful picture of the ocean that she has as her Twitter banner. Look it up.
That's my son, my youngest son. So I just got a beautiful picture of him staring at the sea, and I just thought that was a lovely day, and I had to put that on my website.
It's a beautiful photo. Is that in Australia?
Yeah, I think it was in Coogee, if I remember correctly. I don't have the photo here with me now, but
So have you always loved the ocean? I know that's where your science has taken you, but have you always loved the ocean as something to swim in or boat on or whatever?
my kids love the ocean. I do love to see the ocean. Yeah, I'm not a big swimmer, to be honest. I don't swim in the ocean. I just go and splash a little bit, more like a child, perhaps. I learned to swim quite late
Yeah.
in my life, so I'm not the best swimmer, I must say. But I do enjoy to go to the beach and just relax and see the sea.
And so your science is, I mean, you're an oceanographer, and your science is all about the role of the ocean in our weather. Is there a summary of that? Like, what is the role of the ocean in our weather?
The oceans play a very important role for Australia, and not only for Australia, but in many regions across the globe, because it can modulate the weather patterns that we see. So, for example, in Australia, because Australia is located and surrounded by oceans, so basically there is the Indian Ocean, Pacific, and the Southern Oceans. It affects the weather patterns here, how it changes the circulation basically and bring rain for Australia. So one of the examples is the Pacific. In the tropical Pacific, there is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. It's the main, what we call, mode of variability or climate drivers that impact Australian climate. And in the Indian Ocean, I don't know if you've heard, but there is the Indian Ocean dipole, which is a kind of El Nino type phenomenon in the Indian Ocean. And the Southern Ocean affects, for example, the positions of the storm tracks. So a lot of the synoptic systems that reaches the southern parts of Australia can be modulated by the conditions of the Southern Ocean and the westerly winds in the mid-latitudes.
I was interested in that because I guess maybe because we're on the east coast of Australia, we hear a lot about El Nino and La Nina, but I wondered whether there was an equivalent in the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. We don't hear very much about that.
Yes, that's true, especially with the Atlantic. There is one that is called Atlantic Nino, but doesn't have much of an effect for Australia, and that's why we don't hear much, I guess, here in Australia. But the Indian Ocean dipole is a phenomenon that can affect Australia and the rainfall and weather patterns for, especially for southeast and southwest Western Australia.
And we've had a lot of rain this year, lots of swimming events being cancelled, lots of flooding. It's been quite terrible, actually. Now, this is because of La Nina. Would you be able to explain exactly what La Nina is?
Yeah, so I guess to explain what a La Nina is, I'll just go back to how the tropical Pacific looks like in a normal conditions, in a neutral conditions first. So normally what we see in the tropical Pacific is that the eastern side of the Pacific is cooler than the western side. And the reason for that is that there are trade winds blowing from the east to west, and pushing water to the western side. So the western Pacific is normally warmer than the eastern Pacific. And the eastern Pacific, that is closer to South America, have the water is basically replaced by subsurface cooler water. So you think that, for example, you can think about the water around Galapagos as much cooler than the water in Ireland at the same latitude, but situated in the Western Pacific. So this is how the normal conditions is in the tropical Pacific. Now, during a La Nina event, what happens is that this situation is intensified. So the trade winds intensify, and that there is a response in the ocean that makes more like warmer conditions in the Indonesian seas and the water around in the northern parts of Australia, the Coral Sea, and cooler conditions in the eastern side of the Pacific, closer to South America. The consequence for that is that with a warmer water in the maritime continent or the northern areas of Australia, the Northern Ocean of Australia, what happens is that we have more rain generally, and it tends to favor more moisture to the atmosphere. So that's why generally La Ninas are associated with wet weather for Australia.
Okay, because I mean the water has seemed quite warm this summer. Is that a fair statement? Like we seem to be swimming quite late. The water seems to be quite warm off Sydney anyway.
Yeah, so that's a curious question because the situation that I described before is a larger scale situation, right? And the way that it affects the current in Sydney or the temperature of the beaches in the eastern coast of Australia is a bit more complicated. And I don't think there is a direct link with La Nina and the water being really warmer in the southeast part. But generally, the ocean and the water in the northern areas are warmer. What we see is like basically favors more moisture to come to the atmosphere. So if any synoptic system comes and pass through this warm ocean, and it has a higher chance of bringing moisture on shore, let's say, depending obviously on the type of the synoptic system.
Yeah, so it's more of a macro effect. It's not. It can't necessarily explain the temperature off the coast, but on average, it's a lot warmer. And El Nino is the opposite.
El Nino is the opposite. Sorry, I'll just go back to the the temperatures around Sydney. It's more determined by the local factors. I think that's true. La Nina is more like a larger scale phenomenon, and the impact in the ocean's temperature in close to Sydney is more affected by a local phenomenon, so local winds, let's say.
Okay, that makes sense. And so El Nino is drier because South America gets all the rain. Is that kind of the way it would work?
Yes, that's true. So El Nino is the opposite situation. So you think that now the trade winds along the equatorial Pacific weakens. So the convective activity that generally is in the maritime continent or the Indonesian seas moves to the Central Pacific. Essentially, it's taking away the rain activity to the Central Pacific, basically. So during El Nino events, the tropical Pacific, the Eastern Pacific gets warmer than usual, and the ocean around the northern areas of Australia gets cooler than normal. And generally what we see is that Australia tends to have dry weather during El Nino conditions.
And recently it was World Meteorological Day, just the other week, I think, and it was the title was "The Ocean, Our Climate and Weather." Is World Meteorological Day kind of Christmas for oceanographers? Is it a big celebration or?
I wish it was. No, yeah.
Yeah, there's no answer to that. Yeah, I've seen a few things. I've seen a few articles, but not it hasn't grabbed the front page of the newspaper so much.
Yeah, that's true. I think we need a little bit more media around the meteorological day, the World Meteorological Day.
And I was interested in so I can't remember the exact number, but it's something like the ocean has absorbed 90% of the extra heat that through human-induced climate change. Do you think that climate change is going to break La Nina and El Nino, or do you think we're going to see different weather patterns because of climate change into the future?
Yeah, so the oceans, as you mentioned, it has a really important role in observing the heat and extra heat from anthropogenic greenhouse gases. Um, yeah, so La Ninas and El Ninos and La Ninas are natural oscillations of our climate system. So this is something that and we needed to explain. They always occurred. They occurred now in the present, and they will occur in the future. The difference is that because of increasing greenhouse gases and increasing greenhouse warming, what happens is that there are research showing that the way that El Nino and La Nina will manifest in the future might be different. And the impacts associated with El Nino and La Nina because of the background warming will be more intense in the future.
So more rainfall during La Nina and more drought during El Nino, perhaps.
Yes. So one of the actually quite a few papers now, including a book review that was published this year or the end of last year, actually, I must say, has synthesized all the information and the consensus that we know in this area. It's really difficult to see at the moment how the intensity or the shape of El Ninos and La Ninas will change in the future. But what we know is that because of the increasing greenhouse warming, more moisture in the atmosphere will be available, and the impact of extreme El Nino events and extreme La Nina events that will tend to occur more frequent in the future can be exacerbated. So we do expect, for example, for Australia, like increase the likelihood of heavy rain, so extreme rain during La Nina events.
That's very interesting. So we're not necessarily going to hit like a state change and break the whole system. It's just going to be an exacerbated. At least that's where the research is heading at the moment.
Most climate models tend to simulate in the future and increase the frequency of extreme El Nino events and extreme La Nina events. So those are very strong events. For example, El Nino, that the type of El Nino that occurred in 1997 and 2016, that they will occur more frequently in the future.
And so where is your research heading? What's next for you? Is it more on the Southern Oscillation, or where are you headed with your ocean research?
So I'm very interested in knowing actually the interactions between the tropical oceans. So we generally see and talk about El Ninos and La Ninas because those are the larger scale modes of variability, and they have like a really big impact not only for Australia but across the world. But the fact is that sometimes they co-occur with other climate drivers, as I mentioned, the Indian Ocean dipole, for example, or the southern annular mode. And those climate drivers can change the way that the El Nino Southern Oscillation affect Australian rainfall, for example, or South American rainfall, or other parts of the globe. So I'm interested in seeing what is the changes due to a combined occurrence of those events.
That is really interesting and difficult modelling, I imagine, because, well, it's very intricate. There's a lot of data that needs to go into it, or a lot of heavy modelling.
Yes, that's true. So it's a lot of modeling. I use global climate models to look at those combined appearances of Indian Ocean Dipole and the El Niño Southern Oscillation. Yeah, so it's a lot of data, and not only one model, but a combination of models, like sometimes, 50 or more than 100 simulations. We look for getting robust conclusions about those phenomena.
It's fascinating. I'm really interested to see where it all goes, because it's so complex. I mean, weather modelling is literally where chaos theory came from, isn't it? So it's quite it's going to be really interesting to see how it all turns out. Thank you very much to Andrea Teixeto from the University of New South Wales for taking the time to have a great chat about La Nina and the role of the ocean in our weather. If you'd like any more information on anything you've heard today, if you'd like to find Andrea on Twitter, or myself for that matter, get over to the website at www.thepodpodcast.net. That's www.thepodpodcast.net. I'm hoping the weather eases up and I'll be able to get out this weekend. You'll be able to find that on Strava if that's your thing. Take care. I'll catch you next time on The Pod.